The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and gunpowder as Ezekiel Boone rode down into the canyon, his shadow stretching long across the copper earth. The sun had begun its slow descent, staining the cliffs in blood and gold. Somewhere beneath the hush of the evening came the low, steady sound of a human breath, ragged and unwilling to quit. He reined in his horse, the great animal stamping nervously, as if it too felt the unease that clung to the rocks. She was there, bound upright to a sun-bleached boulder, her wrists raw from rope, her dark hair tangled with dust. Her face was set in a mask of defiance even through the bruises. The air between them seemed to carry a question neither had spoken yet. He swung down from his saddle, boots grinding on the gravel, and studied her with the wary patience of a man who knew that some wounds went deeper than skin. "You are the one I need," he said quietly, the words falling heavy in the stillness. It was not a declaration of love, nor even of intention, more like a statement of fact he had just discovered himself. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with exhaustion. There was no gratitude in her face, only a flicker of curiosity at the stranger who had dared speak to her as if they'd met in another life. The ropes came away under his knife with a dry snap. She staggered, catching herself on the boulder rather than taking his hand. He didn't press it. Instead, he guided her toward his horse with a gentleness that looked strange in such a large man. She hesitated before letting him lift her into the saddle. The warmth of her body was slight against his chest as he mounted behind her, but he could feel the tension in her spine, the mistrust still coiled tight. The canyon mouth was a jagged line against the sky when the first rifle crack echoed from above. Stone chips stung his cheek. He spurred the horse, and they plunged into a winding pass where shadows stretched long and cold. She didn't cry out when he shielded her from falling shale, nor when the second shot rang out, closer this time. Her silence was as sharp as the wind, and it told him more than words could. By the time the stars began to burn above, they reached the back door of the Hollister Inn. Clara May took one look at the girl's condition and swept them inside without question. In the lamplight, Ezekiel finally saw the full cost of whatever had been done to her: purpled ribs, a swollen ankle, the mark of a whip across one shoulder. Clara May worked in silence, grinding herbs, pouring whiskey over wounds, the scent sharp in the close air. Ezekiel stood in the corner, hat in his hands, watching Lozan's gaze drift between the flames in the stove and the man who had pulled her from the canyon. Outside, voices muttered, low and ugly. A stranger had brought an Apache woman into town, and that was enough to set tongues wagging. Clara May's glance toward the window carried its own warning. This place was not safe for a woman like Lozan, not with tempers quick to rise and grudges older than either of them. Later, in the quiet upstairs room, she asked him without turning her head, "Why? Why what? Why risk yourself?" His jaw shifted, as though weighing whether she deserved the truth. "I've seen enough left behind to die. Didn't reckon on adding you to the list." Her eyes lingered on him, searching for something she didn't name. She didn't thank him, but she didn't turn away, either. Sleep came fitfully. At first light, the sheriff's boots creaked on the porch. Amos Weller carried news with the weight of a noose. Harlan Crow was in town, and he had not forgotten what Ezekiel owed him. Lozan heard it from the top of the stairs, her expression unreadable. That night, when the lamps burned low and the inn's floorboards moaned with the shifting of the wind, Ezekiel sat at the small table by her bed, repairing her bowstring with steady hands. She woke to the faint rasp of sinew on wood. For a moment she simply watched him, his broad back bent in the lamplight. She wondered how a man could look so dangerous and yet treat her only with patience. By the second night, danger had drawn closer. Jonas Blackwater came with his hat in his hands, eyes shifting toward the street. Crow's men would be there before dawn. Lozan's fingers brushed the grip of her knife. Ezekiel's hand found the Colt at his belt. No words passed between them, but something unspoken bridged the space, something that felt like the beginning of trust. When the rain came, it drummed against the rooftops, masking the first footfalls in the alley. Crow's men were shadows with knives and rifles. The fight was quick, brutal, Ezekiel a wall between Lawson and the storm of bullets. When one man broke through, she drove her blade into his side without hesitation. His breath left him in a rush, and he crumpled into the mud. She met Ezekiel's gaze through the downpour, something fierce and unyielding in her eyes. By the time the last man fell, the rain had washed the streets clean of blood. They left town before the sun rose, the smell of wet earth clinging to their clothes. In the high desert, beneath a sky so wide it could swallow whole lives without a trace, they rode side by side. Lawson told him, in halting words, of the betrayal that had left her tied to that stone, the tribe's politics sharper than any blade. He listened without interruption, only once glancing at her as if to make sure she was still real beside him. When they reached the red cliffs, the world felt emptied of everyone but the two of them. There, with only Jonas and Clara May as witnesses, they stood together. No rings, no preacher, just a silver concho from Ezekiel's saddle pressed into her palm, a promise as solid as the stone beneath their feet. The days that followed were stitched together with small mercies. She mended his shirt by the firelight, teaching him the Apache word for patience. He showed her how to read the labels on tins of coffee, his finger tracing each letter slowly. Their hands found each other more often, not in passion but in the quiet certainty that they belonged where they stood. The winter came hard and early, snow muffling the sound of the wind. Lawson's labor began on a night when the sky was white with storm. Jonas stayed to help her, while Ezekiel kept watch at the door. The gang that had once haunted their nights returned, desperate and mean, hoping to take from them what they had built. Ezekiel met them in the blizzard, his body a shield in the swirling dark. Gunfire cracked like breaking branches. Each shot brought the risk that he would not come back through the door. Inside, a child's cry rose above the storm. Lawson lay back, her breath ragged, her eyes fixed on the door as if willing him to appear. When he did, wounded but standing, she placed their son in his arms. The baby's skin was warm against the cold of his coat, his tiny fists curling into the fabric as if holding fast to life itself. They named him in her tongue, a word that meant peace, though both knew peace in these lands was something one had to fight to keep. That night, by the fire's glow, Ezekiel held his family close, the snow falling silent outside. If there was a lesson in all the miles behind them, it was this. In a land where the wind could strip a man bare and the dust could bury his name, what mattered was the hand you found in the dark, and the promise you made never to let it go. And maybe, just maybe, the desert would remember you kindly for it.